Brian Koo. Thank you all for coming. We saved the best for last. I am a writer-director. I owe Sundance a lot. I was a Screenwriters Lab fellow, and I'm also the founder of the filmmaking publication No Film School. Thank you. We were recording a podcast earlier and saying goodbye to Park City. I cried twice on the podcast, so today I'll try to only cry once here. And yes, welcome to the panel, Crafting Connection, Humor, and Humanity, on screen with editors, composers, and casting directors. I guess my first question would be for the editors, how do we cut this down? How do we make this... Just kidding. Obviously, we're going to leave the humor in there. I'm just going to improv the whole thing. Okay, so I'd like to introduce everyone. We have a great panel of editors, composers, casting directors, just all the people that, below the line and above the line, actually, that have great projects here. So it's Sundance. It's a madhouse. Everyone's running around. You know, not everyone here has seen every film, I'm sure. So for all of you, can you please introduce your projects to the audience so they know what we're going to talk about today? Let's just start here with Brian number one. Sorry, Brian number two.
Thank you. The Gallerist is directed by Kathy Yan, who made Birds of Prey and Dead Pigs. We also worked together on an episode of Succession, and it's a black comedy set in the art world.
I'm here with The Incomer. It's a debut feature from Louis Paxton. They're calling it a folk comedy. It's set in a remote island in Scotland. It's about a brother and sister who've been living there for 30 years by themselves. And one day they're joined by an incomer, played by Donald Gleeson, who works for the Scottish Borough Council, and he's trying to convince them to leave the island with hilarious consequences.
31 Candles is directed by Jonah Feingold, and it's a coming-of-age romantic comedy about a 30-year-old who has never had a bar mitzvah and decides to find the love of his life by reconnecting with his camp crush, who is a bar mitzvah tutor. And you can imagine everything goes perfectly well as planned. And then Bibb City is a short documentary directed by John Sipity about 3 different organizations that go into the heart of a city in rural Georgia and basically take it from utter poverty into a place that's really flourishing. It's wonderful.
The musical is a debut feature from Giselle Bonilla and Alexander Heller. I don't want to give any spoilers, so I'm just going to read the log line so that I don't ruin anything for anyone. When a frustrated playwright and middle school theater teacher finds out his ex-girlfriend has started dating his nemesis, the principal, he decides to ruin the principal's chances of winning the blue ribbon of academic excellence. It's a dark comedy.
See You When I See You is a film directed by Jay Duplass, and it's got a great ensemble cast with David Duchovny and Hope Davis and Caitlin Dever, Kumail Nanjiani. And it's about a young comedy writer who loses his sister and also his best friend, and how him and his family just try and figure out how to move on with their lives with this tragic loss. And there's a lot of humor in it, but there's also a lot of deeply emotional situations.
The Price of Milk is a 4-part docuseries that tells the untold story of the Got Milk campaign and the dark side and secret underbelly of America's relationship with milk. And I should mention that it actually premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in June, but I think there was a cancellation on the panel and I was invited anyway. So I'm glad to share about it anyway.
Great. Well, we have obviously a breadth of tones of projects here, but also many of you have worked on projects where you're going from one thing that's funny to something that's sad. And my first question is, could you talk a little bit about sort of adapting yourself and your craft to the material at hand and what your process is, whether it's watching stuff to sort of get in the mood or how you go from one project to something that's completely different? And that question is for anyone, so whoever's got it on the tip of their tongue, please jump in.
I'll jump in. As a composer, it's interesting because a lot of times you're required to jump sometimes even within a particular project itself from genre to genre. But particularly from a project when you're working sometimes, as in my case with these 2 films, from a romantic comedy to a documentary, very different styles. And for me, it's always come back to relationship and starting with who that director is and what's the story that they're trying to tell, because that humanity is something that resonates with every single one of us, and we understand that the human experience comes from a myriad of places, and so being able to draw from someone else's human experience can inform the way that you have to respond emotionally and narratively. And it's really cool, because then instead of thinking about a particular genre, as a musician, we have to draw from that tool belt anyway, but you're really drawing for the emotional subtext of what's going on. It allows you to speak to that emotional subtext in whatever genre or style you're writing in at the time.
I got my start as an editor, so I naturally am thinking about the editors here. What about you guys when you're going from one thing and trying to sort of clean your palette and approach something totally new? Does that even work? Does cleaning palette work?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. The dailies kind of dictate the answer because things are there that you have to respond to intuitively. But I would say if you were to try to impose any kind of craft, like comedy is almost always fast. There is slow comedy. I don't want to say that there isn't. That's a very other specific kind of flavor. But think when there are zingers, when there's comedy that comes from dialogue and from action, as in our movie, or like a thriller kind of conceit, but funny. It's all about speed. So it's really about, for me, trying to not cut arbitrarily just to take out a pause, because that is bad editing, but make everything go as quickly as possible so that dialogue that's funny is funnier by being close to other dialogue. Like the chaos helps the comedy. So it's this balancing act between, do I really cut here, or can I let this exist? Do I do a speed ramp, or do I add a sound effect to fill in a place so that it's more crowded, so that it feels like it's going faster? So yeah, speed is a huge part of that.
Given this panel is about collaboration, I'm curious about the editors and composers here. And on your different projects, have you been able to work together earlier in the process and really sort of be able to kick ideas back and forth versus the whole thing is temp scored and it just comes to the composer? So editors or composers, if you want to talk about that.
With Jay, the director, he loves to just give a composer a final cut, which is actually great. And there's advantages and disadvantages, but it means I'm not spending months and months having to rethink scenes. The director knows the film better than anyone. He's spent so much time with it. He knows the motivation of every character. So I might watch it, once or twice and think, oh, this is what this scene means, and send him something. He said, actually, it should feel more from a different character's perspective. And you're like, oh. And so there's one moment in the film, where actually there's a whole series of moments where the main character has flashbacks back to being with his sister before she died. And one of them is this mysterious moment where his mom walks out the door, and then his sister, as a girl, comes back. And there's no cut, though, so we don't necessarily realize we're in a flashback right away. And so it's a lot of the job of the music to kind of help tell what is going on. And so the temp was kind of working somewhat well. He's like, I think the temp is working well. So he did something similar, and we both watched it together at the playback. It's like, something's not quite right. Like, we as an audience don't understand what's going on. We know, the director and composer, because we watched this and we understand this is a flashback scene, but it needs to be like otherworldly. And just like one adjective like that kind of was like, oh, otherworldly. And then the harmony can become a little bit more mysterious, more ambiguous. It's not as like, oh, he's having a nice flashback. And so I think because of that collaboration, because he has that insight, and just one adjective can set it to this new place, I think it always helps the film.
I'd like to hear from the director and composer here about your collaboration.
Yeah, so on terms of music and the temp attachments and love that a director can have, what I've learned and what I like to do, I work with the composer Dan Deacon on The Price of Milk, and we wanted a score that was sort of very esoteric and electronic, and sort of the opposite, reflected the absurdity of milk, and didn't sound like the Americana of all the images that you see on the dairy farm. And what we did with him, and what I like to do, is really work with the composer on the temp, so only use either their temp or have them talk to them really early on and have them provide references in temp. That way there's a language we're exploring together, and when we get further along, this is also sometimes out of practicality, have like a shared language and have a shared cut, which goes through a million iterations, especially in doc, obviously narrative too. So that's a very, I think it's just important to work with the composer as early as humanly possible. And that can be even at like the germ of the idea of the doc, or you've shot some footage and sent it to them. So that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, and just kind of jumping off that, the idea of that temp and working with a composer who you're already working with that temp, it's really interesting because when a director comes in who hasn't seen the behind the scenes process of the other films that temp is drawn from, it speaks to the emotional resonance of what the music is doing, which then allows it to be more objective in an amazing way. And so I think it actually, I remember when I was in school, mentors were like, never score a film that has your own temp in it. And I actually think it's very freeing because you get to hit the ground running because you're like, oh, I know what that's doing emotionally. I understand the tools. I know how we got there. And so in many ways, you think about storytelling as a universal language, you're able to break these boundaries and suddenly start communicating as humans about things that make sense on a foundational level. It's really cool.
Jamie, as a casting director, your collaboration with the director is obviously a huge part of what will shape the film, but in the musical, you had a cast of child actors. Can you tell us about collaborating with the director to find these kids who are going to bring the story to life?
Yeah, so usually when I come on to movies, it's just a producer and a writer and a director, and then they come to me and I come on. And so that happened last year. I met with everybody and they said they wanted to do a citywide Los Angeles kid search. We wanted to go to schools. We wanted to go to drama programs. We wanted to go to parks and just find kids, which is all very exciting, but takes a long time. And they told me very kindly that they were not going to bring me on until they had their full financing. So they told me they wanted to hire me, and then a few months went by as they got their adult cast, Rob Lowe, Will Brill, and Gillian Jacobs. And then they got their financing, and I came on and they said, we're shooting in 3 weeks. Can you do your search? And I said, no, I cannot do that. But I will find you real kids. They didn't want shiny Disney kids, which have a very important place in the world, but they wanted very real, grounded kids. Giselle Bonilla, the director, was a child actor herself, and so she wanted us to have a process that we were able to find kids where we felt like we really knew them. And so our audition process was we selected, basically just based off of faces, some kids that were submitted to us by agents and managers, and we asked them in self-tapes to just talk to us for a couple of minutes and tell us about a piece of art that they had created that they were proud of and if they would have changed anything about it. And it became very clear in just that which kids were going to be right for this world, because you could really see who was excited to share things, who was nervous, who was funny, what pace they would go with. And then we brought everybody in for a day at the American Film Institute in the middle of July, which is crazy to do with a bunch of 12-year-olds. And we just played a lot of improv games, and we saw how they all kind of became their own groups and who became friends with whom, and they're all still really close. And so it just became really clear to all of us who we needed to hire, because they all kind of fell into place in real time.
Nicholas, Jamie mentioned the word financing, and we're all looking for financing, I think. Maybe I was making jokes earlier because my next movie's a comedy, in case there's any billionaires in the crowd. No Ellisons? Okay, fine. The Price of Milk was financed through a brand partnership. So can you talk about, as a director, weighing the brand money versus your own independence and all of navigating all of that?
Yeah, this is a bit of a outlier, I guess, from connection on screen, but we got the milk money to make The Price of Milk from Oatly, who actually let us make a investigative, independent documentary. And again, this is I want to keep it grounded in the language of the panel, but the key thing was for us to ensure creative and editorial independence. And I do think for folks here that want to talk more about financing, I actually think there is an emerging world where brands, much like the other high net worth individuals and foundations and other sources of support, are coming in to fill some of these creative and industry gaps. And that's something that I'm excited about, and hopefully will raise the money to actually uplift a lot of the business problems that, again, this panel is not about, but I know we're all feeling and is something that I'm really focused on trying to help so that we can pay our editors, composers, and casting directors a lot more.
Speaking of more comedy, Brian Cates, your particular brand of comedy in this film, would you say is it satirical, or how would you characterize it?
For sure.
And do you think that there's a different kind of editing rhythm when you're dealing with satire versus screwball comedy, slapstick, other kinds of comedies?
Oh, I love screwball comedy. Well, the speed is really a screwball comedy speed, but I think the thing about satire that is really important is not so much the cadence of it or the rhythm. I mean, that is important, but it's that if it's too over the top, it kind of doesn't work. I mean, it could. Like, you could. I mean, it really depends on what matters. Really, is internal consistency. And if you create a language, you have to stick to it and not change tones. So, but generally, as a rule of thumb, I think in terms of the acting and choosing the performances and building the performances, even in satire, you have to believe that the actors believe what they're saying or thinking or feeling. And if it feels like a clown show, it's kind of not relatable. I mean, nothing against clowns, but so really, I think the trick with satire, if there is one, is to still feel the sincerity of the moment and understand the actor's motivations. And what's funny should be the absurdity of the situation, or the chaos of the situation, or the juxtaposition of lots of. I mean, so in our movie, there's a ticking clock. Sorry, that was loud. A ticking clock, thriller element, and there's women coming together who, as the director said yesterday at the Q&A, kind of maybe would have hated each other, except now they're doing this thing together. So it's like that kind of buddy thing. There's a lot of things that generate humor, but you have to choose performances that are sincere. And I would say that if you don't, then you're risking just not connecting to the movie.
Yeah, similarly along those lines, Brian Davis, your movie, The Incomer, mixes deadpan humor with more emotional, dramatic moments. So as you were editing these different rhythms and different tones, what was your approach?
Yeah, well, the first thing is, like, when I'm watching the rushes, I only get to see the rushes for the first time once. So I'm trying to remember those moments that made me laugh, made me chuckle, and obviously I'm putting in like markers, so I'm going to remember where all of that stuff is. Because with comedy, like, the more times you watch it, the less funny it gets. So, like, the last week of the cut, you're just sitting watching the cut with the director with complete silence in the room. So way back at the start, yeah, that's the important time. So I'm trying to find all of the funniest stuff, but also the funniest stuff may not necessarily be what needs to be used for the scene once you start putting the scene together, So if luckily on The Incomer, the actors, like, they really give us a good variety of performance. So we were able to kind of pick and choose, like, how far to go. So, like, you can't have everybody at 11 the entire scene, or it just doesn't work. So you can pick and choose, find the right, like, tastes that you want to put the ingredients that you want to put together, to kind of cook your pizza, if that makes sense. It's just, yeah.
Jordan, See You When I See You also mixes a number of tones. Can you talk about cooking that pizza from a musical state? No, not going to work. Metaphor's not going to work, but you know what I mean. Talk about the music of the different tones.
Yeah, when Jay and his brother Mark Duplass approached me about this score, they said, we have this film, and it's basically an ode to these 80s family dramas that we grew up with loving. Terms of Endearment, St. Elmo's Fire. And he's like, we want a score like that. I was like, oh, okay. And then I listened to those scores again, and I was like, these are very 80s-like synth sounds. And they're like, no, not the sounds, and not really the melody. It's okay. So I was trying to figure out, well, what are they responding to? And I think it was the fact of just having a memorable melody, which we don't really hear as often in scores anymore. And so when I sent them the main theme, I made a list of adjectives and emotions that I wanted to hit. And I spent a lot of time and got really specific. So maybe it's like uneasiness, There's nostalgia in there. The first scene is basically watching the family do chores, but with the loss of this family member. And so, what's going to capture this? Because there's like there's a grief underlying this whole scene, but it's also got to move and it's carrying the scene, but you don't want to take too. So all these need to be really nuanced. And so by putting all those adjectives and emotions together, that's where kind of a concept emerges. And I knew I wanted to use acoustic instruments because something just really human about that. I knew I didn't want to do a synth score for that aspect of the film. So it's piano based and guitars, drums, a lot of woodwinds, strings, and all these things just to bring that emotion out and hit all of these different emotions I'm trying to elicit.
For any of you, was there a time in your project where the tone shifted or even the meaning of it shifted and you discovered something that you didn't know going in, just as the exploratory process of making it? I'm interested in any shifts.
Yeah, when I was scoring Bibb City, the film, as often happens with documentaries, the film took shape as it was coming together, because what happened was they had a locked cut and they ended up going back and doing some pickup work and having more conversations with these 3 organizations that were on the ground in this city in Georgia. And I got a call from the director and he said, "Hey, we need to change the ending." And I was like, okay. And it was interesting because the original direction that I had received was that the whole score needed to feel like a perpetual sunrise. Like that there was this idea of this musical sense of the sun was rising, and then it came out, but it never hit full midday. It just looked like you had the morning light. And then at the end of the film, originally, it hit sunset. So we never had full daylight, and then we hit dusk. And so kind of looking the beauty of the morning and the evening hours. And the tone shift was that the film actually needed to end with this new footage at midday, like full sun. And so it completely shifted the arc of how everything had been scored. And when you're working with a film that actually now exists and is showing in 2 different iterations, there's a 27-minute cut and a 15-minute cut, which are very different in the doc world, as many of us know. That's a very different musical arc as well. And so it was interesting to try to figure out, like, how do you capture the essence and the emotional resonance and the potency of what's going on in 2 very different scopes. And so it was interesting because the original instrumentation that we had was 3 different pianos that were working simultaneously. And we added 2 more because it was just the idea of, like, how do you create this rich gloss and shimmer and shine, but still this really grounded sense of warmth that you feel like when you're standing out in the midday sun. And it was really cool to see how the new footage that was captured came in. And one of the first times I've ever encountered that, where it's like the entire tone shifted as you were almost done. So
That's a great example. Anyone else with any tonal shifts or just project shifts in general?
Sorry, go ahead. I think tone is such a weird thing. It's like, for me, it's almost just like a gut feeling about what does and doesn't fit into this film. Do you know what I mean? It's not like I go through it. It's not something I'm thinking about. It's just kind of, depending on the director, their vision, their voice, you just kind of have this kind of feeling for what's right, what belongs in that world and what doesn't belong in that world. Like in The Incomer, sometimes we found there were things that were a little bit too much of a nudge and a wink to the camera. And it just didn't fit. We just had this feeling this just does not fit in the film. And it's just something you find slowly throughout the process.
Speaking of music, the Gallerist has our composer Andrew Orkin wrote music before we even started shooting, and it was had a very sort of techno dance percussive quality that was really, really cool, but sometimes a little bit cold, which befitted the Miami Art Basel setting and the white walls of the gallery kind of, and marching through that kind of feeling. By the time we finished the movie, it was clear that our finale needed to have more emotion and warmth. And so he wrote, seemingly in one night, which seems crazy, but I think he did, this gorgeous suite that didn't feel like it departed from that instrumentation that much, but was much warmer and much more emotive. And then he sort of retrofitted earlier parts of the movie that were talking thematically to the ending, to have the bones of those melodies so that when it comes at the end, it was a fulfillment of something earlier. So that, I mean, I love working with composers for that reason, because that stuff is so important, and it really is story and structure, but it's happening on a whole subliminal level, not on a writing level, and it's really great.
I'll just say, in The Price of Milk, we really tried to mix the tone to match the kind of absurdity of the story, because we sort of flip-flop from learning, going inside the secret government cheese lab where the US government invented the stuffed crust pizza, going back to the pizza metaphor. And then in the next scene, we are on a family dairy farm where a fifth generation farmer is losing his farm because of the government policies around milk. And it's very emotive and emotional. And we, I think, worked very closely with our composer and editor to do that tonal shift, to make, there's very frenetic, high-speed investigations undercover on industrial dairy farms, and then there's these very languid, long, beautiful scenes. And I think, from my perspective on the directing side with documentary, especially social issue, social justice ones, you really want to make sure that you're not living in one place for too long. You have to, I've heard it said that people are most vulnerable when they're laughing, and if you want to get people to kind of do these sort of action, take action documentaries, I think it's really important to kind of catch people off guard and make them laugh. And of course, it really, that's something that happens in post so often, to take people on that up and down roller coaster, where they feel both inspired but not sort of preached at.
Great. Brian mentioned a composer doing an entirely new music suite in one night. And I think we've all been on tight deadlines and worked late nights. So I'm just interested in some war stories of, we had to totally do this thing and then it was due in 3 hours and the export was not going fast. Like, it doesn't have to be on this project, just in general. What was the time that you thought it was going to be impossible and you found a way, and how did you find a way?
I mean, I've had it both sides where, you have a crazy deadline and you're like, we got to get done, and then you just get it done. I've also had the opposite, which is like, there's no deadline. So we're at version 10. It's pretty good. Why don't we try another? And so there's both sides of it. There's something nice to a medium deadline. I like a medium deadline.
What was the longest project that you've been on?
I've been on one that's lasted close to a year, probably. Yeah. So from a composing standpoint, if that's like your movie that you're on, it's a long time.
There's a studio comedy that I scored a couple years ago, and it shall remain nameless here, but it has some big names in it. It's a major Christmas comedy, which is really fun. But we had finished the score, it had been approved, greenlit, we had recorded it, it was being mixed, and 36 hours before it was due, I got a call saying, hey, the studio has notes. And I said, I'm sorry, what? And they said, the studio has notes, they reviewed it. And apparently there was an entire department that hadn't watched the film. And so we got the notes back, and half the notes were color notes, which I'm not quite sure why the music department got them. But then the music department had notes, and the notes were, one of the notes genuinely was, can we license the score to The Shape of Water for this scene? And it was like, that just won an Oscar, so I don't think that's going to happen, but we can reshape this scene. And so we did. And so in, I think it was 14 hours, we rewrote about 35 minutes of score for the film and delivered it, and it aired about 10 days later. It was pretty crazy. And it was number 8 in the world for quite some time. So it was great. So it went well, but it was just one of those things of like, you know what, we're going to make it work. So
Yeah, I had a bit of an overlap with another project with the Incomer. I was working on a horror film called Hokum, and the Incomer had started shooting. So basically I was working on Hokum during the day and then cutting together scenes for the Incomer in the evening. But I actually found that the Incomer was a really nice palate cleanser. And when I come back the next day to come back on Hokum, maybe some ideas kind of came that wouldn't have came if I hadn't cleansed my palate previous day. So maybe we should all be cutting 2 films at the same time.
I'll just say I've had films here at Sundance, at South by, and Tribeca, and in every single case, I have either brought a DCP directly to the theater or convinced whatever technical person to give us like the maximum amount of days, like 4 days before, and that put a lot of pressure on all of our post people. So I think that's like, at least in documentary, the absolute norm to push it to the very, very limit before a premiere.
Well, as collaborators, sometimes the studio is our collaborator. And in your anecdote about their note made me think of one of my own. But I will ask you all about like the worst note you've ever gotten. But the worst note I ever got was, this was for a movie that I already shot. It was the Sundance Labs project. It's a Netflix film called Amateur. And the kid gets out of the van, and the note was, "Can he be wearing Beats by Dre headphones?" And I was like, we shot this scene. Like, what are you even asking? Are you asking for like, is it a visual effect note? And like, what would it achieve? So, anyway, he's not wearing Beats by Dre headphones in that scene. But if you ever have some notes that just befuddled you, I would love to hear them.
I mean, I've been asked at least twice to keep the executive producer's kids in the shot. Which is not a bad. I mean, you could, as long as. But in one case, it was a B camera shot, not shot by our cinematographer with the wrong lens, didn't fit stylistically, and it caused a lot of tension. I actually lost that job and had to get it back. Yeah.
Because of the EP's kids not getting their glamour shot. How'd you get it back?
I had to prove my worth by recutting the film really well. Yeah.
Well, congrats on.
Thank you. It's a long time ago.
Anyone else?
I get crazy names thrown at me for things, right? Where it's, we're making a $2 million unfinanced indie. Can you get us Jennifer Lawrence? The answer is no. She comes to you. You don't go to her. So it's a lot of that for me, where it's just these names that got tossed out that either are just completely wrong for what they said they wanted, or are just completely ungettable for the scale of the project.
Have you had actors, reps, like really aggressively approach you for something that they're really wrong for? Then how do you deal with that?
It depends on the level of actor or rep. Usually my response is, I don't see it, but if you want to do an audition and prove me wrong, go for it. I don't usually get proven wrong, but it has happened. It doesn't feel great when I was like, you're so not right for it, and they come in and they do an audition that actually was right for it. But yeah, that's usually what I say is prove it to me.
I think there's a lot of filmmakers here when they're looking to attach cast to their film, and oftentimes the cast is the financeable element of the movie. How do you navigate the collaboration with the director and producers in terms of, okay, who's going to have the best chance of getting this actor? Is it a producer? Is it a casting director? Like, what are those conversations like?
I mean, it's that conversation. It's okay. We have the people we want to go to. We look at who the reps are. Who on the team knows you well enough can actually get a read. So sometimes that's me. Sometimes that's a producer. Sometimes it's, oh well, my dad knows that person. They play poker together, and it's like, great. You get them the script, and then we'll go through the agent after they've already read it.
Okay, so when you started on this journey with the project, no matter how long it was, and even if you were working on another one at the same time, did you feel like there was a goal in terms of what you would want audiences to feel or a takeaway? And then, how do you feel now being at Sundance with audiences experiencing it? What has that emotional journey been like for you? And I'd like to hear from everyone.
It's been great. My film doesn't premiere until Tuesday, but it was the volunteer screening. So it's been really cool just standing in lines, and I hear volunteers being like, "Oh, DeBlas film," and I talk to them about it, and it's been amazing. They say we laughed, we cried, and I think what this panel is all about is that it's about connection, and the film is about this family story, and we need connection, and I think that was what the whole score is trying to support, in all its elements, whether it's bringing the tension to contrast that, or just playing under it with a nice melody that carries you through the film. So I think just we need connection, guys.
I mean, I think everyone hopes that your indie film gets to premiere at a festival like this, so it feels great. Mine just premiered this afternoon, so I haven't had a chance to hear if anyone's talking about it yet. We shall see. It was really nice in a theater to know that the jokes that we all laughed at when we just read the script or when we did the auditions did play the way that we wanted them to.
Grant?
Yeah, Bibb City premieres tomorrow. We've done some internal tests, and it's been really sweet just to see people responding really well and just having the response of, wow, I have to go out and do something about this, which is, I think, is what you hope for in the doc world. 31 Candles is interesting because you talked about Tribeca. So 31 Candles is actually in theaters right now. It had its festival run, and it's been really interesting in that, similar to festival experience, to sit in a theater with an audience and to hear somebody weeping watching the film. And like, I remember when I wept seeing this before it had score, and so seeing somebody have a visceral reaction, and then coming up afterwards and seeing that took me back. Like, there's a lady came up to me, she said, I haven't thought about that moment in my life for 30 years, and I was able to work through it. Like, and so seeing somebody feel very cathartic through that process is really encouraging. And Jordan talked about like having that sense of connection and in collaborations. Like, that's why we do this. We're storytellers because we're humans. We want to tell stories about humans by humans with other humans. It's great.
Brian?
Yeah, this is the best part of the job is coming to festivals and watching your film with an audience. Like, the entire time that I'm working on a film, I'm making decisions, and every decision that I'm making, I'm thinking, what is an audience member gonna think of this? Like, what story are they gonna put into their heads? You know, what story are they gonna write in their heads when they see and hear what I've put in front of them? So it's great to finally come here to the best audiences in the world.
Brian, you just had your premiere last night?
Yeah, we did at 9:30, and there's a monologue near the end of the movie that is given by Divine Joy Randolph, who plays the artist in the film, and it's a monologue about the artist's relationship to the work. I wish I could quote it exactly. I used to be able to, but it was. She says something like, "And the world births the work, and I lose control. You lose. I lose control." And whatever you intended it to be is, God, it's so much more eloquent the way that Kathy wrote it. But it's I was watching it last night, hearing those words, thinking we're in a hall of mirrors where this is the moment where we give it out and lose control and have to accept whatever it is not, it doesn't belong to us anymore. And it's actually very bittersweet and kind of melancholy. I think rap parties are really fun. I think that the party you have if you have a party with your post crew after you lock or after you finish the mix is really fun. Premieres are the goodbye. And I find the melancholy, and I like to have a job ready afterwards so that I don't dwell in. I don't want to feel the postpartum feeling very long.
I'll go and just say that Price of Milk premiering at Tribeca was amazing because it's a TV show. We'll be streaming later this year, and we were very lucky that Tribeca and Sundance now as well have episodic programs, and it's great. I know a lot of us work in TV as well, and you often don't get that experience to actually do the festival run, so I'm excited about that embrace of festivals. And next week we are showing it on Capitol Hill with members of Congress. I'll be flying to DC from here, and I'm hoping to make a connection there because that's also part of why we made it.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that from the advocacy standpoint, because collaborators can also be, the government, and if you're advocating for something with it, it's been out for a while now, and you're going to see it on TV. So where do you hope it goes next?
Yeah, what we're doing, just on the impact piece, we actually are taking this show around to family dairy farms and other kinds of farms. The kind of main message of it, besides all the fun pop culture nostalgia for the Got Milk campaign, is that the small farm in America is dying, and actually it's the same government program that's behind Got Milk that's destroying the small family farm. And so we are touring the country with it. And what I think is really cool about it, just back to the brand thing, is that even though it was paid for by a plant milk company, it's actually about how small farmers, including dairy farmers who produce real milk, are America's heroes. And so we're, and make our food. So I come from that background of wanting to make things that inspire change. And of course, I think that all starts with the kind of emotional connections that we've been talking about on this panel. So hopefully we'll do that with the show.
We have a little bit of time for questions, I think. So if you are, I don't even have to tee it up. We've already got one. I'll repeat the question for the video. Go ahead.
I come from a classical music background when I was younger. Like I went to LaGuardia for classical voice. So, since then I like make most of my money off of like acting and color grading because I went to film school and I just started a production company, like doing a little bit of everything. But my main question was for editing, composing, and like, I guess the Gallerist, that's like the ideal scenario where you have score like before you even film. But how do we feel about temp music as editors, and then as composers, do you just ignore all of it? And yeah, how do you deal with that whole part of like filmmaking?
The question's about temp music and how composers and editors feel about it. One of my least favorite parts is getting notes on the temp music, as if, like, yeah, no, it's not right. You're right. So how have y'all felt about that?
I think it depends on the director. So temp music can be very tough for a composer, especially on an indie, because if they've temped in this music that was made on a $5 million music budget,
Hans Zimmer,
Thomas Newman, John Williams, and they've listened to that piece their whole life and it's their favorite piece of music of all time, hey, beat it. You're kind of just stuck. And there's this thing called temp love, where they've been watching it for 5 months with that same piece and it works perfectly and they edit it to it. So that is very hard to compete with. And so sometimes you just have to deal with it, or you have to get close enough where you feel comfortable with your own craft. But then on the other side, I think temp can be very useful, because if you just give someone a movie with no temp and we just say, okay, you do what you want, then you're basically writing the temp, because you don't have any basis. So at least if I like a decent temp, because then if it's really good, you're like, oh, this is gonna be hard to beat. But if it's showing you, okay, I get what they're trying to do. It's not totally working, but I get what they want. I think the placement, okay, it gives us a reference. So I like it from that standpoint, and it's just a way to start those conversations with something already there, rather than, hey, what do we do for this one? What do we do for this one? So, and Jay Duplass is really good about, I don't think I've done 2 films with him, and there's never been one cue that he was like, I just love this cue. Like he's always just said, I ignore the temp after you start, and he's stuck to that. And I really appreciate that, because that's not necessarily been always the case.
I think that your question brings up the whole issue of like how perfect does a rough cut need to be to present to a studio, and never ever ever believe that they can watch anything unfinished. Like you will get you will get notes on the temp. And I think that this is a trending, growing dilemma, because now that the tools are more democratized in terms of like, just like the price of software and the fact that you can cut on Instagram edits or whatever, like, or iMovie for iPhone, like that's great, but it also means that you can do more of the post work in the rough cut stage, and money people, let's say, are getting very used to seeing visual effects at the beginning. They're getting very used to hearing really good score and music editing at the beginning. So like the ante keeps going up and up and up, while the compensation for the crew and the union benefits aren't necessarily. And it's creating this labor dilemma where the quality has to rise, but what you get for it isn't rising.
And sound design also, I'm finding now, especially in the horror, like they're expecting a fully polished sound design and mix in the edit, or else you're just getting sound notes forever and they won't lock it until it sounds right. Meanwhile, there's a sound designer in a room beside me waiting to start the job because we haven't locked.
And they haven't started paying that person.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's jumping in on that real quick too. It's the idea of the cost of production, and I think imagination is diminishing in a lot of ways, and not from the power of imagination. I think in an interesting way, our current culture has more imagination than ever, but I think that the price that's attached to it is being diminished. And so when you see something that's going out as a rough cut or with rough score and rough sound, I've been really fortunate to work with editors that will do a pretty good job of putting in music editors that will put in a good score, a good temp score, except for several spots where it's just abysmal on purpose, because it helps illustrate this is broken. And so when it's replaced with the correct thing, people are like, this is a revelation. You're like, yes, that's why you hire craftsmen to do this. Because what it does is it actually gives us as fellow creatives the opportunity to elevate each other's work for a generation that's increasingly curious. And I think that's coupled with, we're starting to see, and really fortunate right now to live it where we're seeing the turning of the tide in a lot of ways, where the generation that, grew up on the golden age of film in the 70s through kind of the early 2000s are being given the keys to the kingdom. And so they've been like, how do we do this in a really cool and exciting and fresh way? And so we get to stand together as fellow creatives and say, hey, let's elevate this together. It's awesome.
We have time for one more question.
I have two questions. They're both
Two
very
more
important. My first question, I would love to know how you got the money from Oakley to do it. Like, if they come to you, do you go to them? I really want to know that. And the other question, this might be too rudimentary, but like, why do you picture lock before you start on music? I've always wondered that.
Okay, first question for Nicholas about how he got the money.
I became aware that there was somebody at the brand that had an interest in doing documentary film. And I pitched them on a version of the story that would not be an oat milk commercial. That would be this kind of very, a thing that doesn't tell anybody what to eat or what to drink. And they love that. And so that we're able to build on that. And I should say that I run a commercial production company. It's called People's Television. We do about half independent feature docs and some scripted, and then the other half branded. So I know a little bit how to navigate and what market people want to hear. But crucially, I think we were able to preserve the creative integrity of the project such that it premiered at Tribeca. So I think sometimes it's giving the specific brand financing question. They cannot pay. No brand, Oatly had done a Super Bowl commercial the year before, and they spent more money on that than they did on our, 2-hour documentary series. But they couldn't get that Super Bowl commercial to play at Tribeca or a Sundance or to move culture. And so I think that's a new, way that some independent projects can be approached, but they need to be done extremely carefully to preserve the integrity of the piece and of all the artists working on it.
Great. And the second question was about locking picture before having a score and the advantages or disadvantages of that.
You shouldn't. It's financial. I mean, you stagger the crew. You stagger when they hire the crew and when they start paying the crew. Also, if you need to hire a composer, it's kind of the last thing a director wants to be doing on set or in pre-production is looking at composer reels and doing interviews of composers. It seems so far away. That it's just not a good use of time. But like movies where the director and the composer have a pre-existing relationship, like they did in our movie, you can start early as long as the studio agrees to hire that person. Or like, movies that are more out of the box. Like I imagine like Zone of Interest hired Mika Levy before they start. Like, I don't know, maybe they didn't, but like, it feels like they did. It's a broken system. It's a throwback to an earlier system when things were not, when it was harder to, like when you cut on flatbeds, you would have a whole bunch of mag reels of sound and music, and that's very different than having your picture reels up. And like, it's really a throwback to like analog editing and that process. And now that everything's digital and everything can be flown in quickly, we still haven't transitioned, and we haven't transitioned financially where they will be like, oh yeah, it's worth the money to hire the composer early.
Do you prefer to edit with the director, like when he's editing, like not Final Cut? Like you prefer to edit during the editing process, right?
During the shooting process?
No, like when you have all the dailies and like you prefer to already be editing them and not when you just get the final picture lock.
The music, you mean?
Yeah.
I want the music. I want as many things that are going to affect the movie as early as possible, whether it's visual effects, music, or anything. Yeah. So yeah, it's always better early because then you know what doesn't work, and what does work.
Yeah, I find these days it's a lot more common that a composer will just generate a ton of tracks that are in the right kind of vein or tone for the film and give those to you in advance, so you can at least start temping those in, and you're using music by the actual composer, so they're actually capable of pulling that off, their own work.
Well, as you guys run out of time in the edit, so have we run out of time with our panel. We've also run out of time in Park City. We're talking about the financial challenges, and so hopefully, perhaps as we move to a bigger venue for Sundance with larger screens and historic theaters, we'll uncover some more audiences and some more income. And I think it also takes a lot of creators, collaborators supporting each other, and a lot of organizations supporting independent film as well. So I'd like to thank Impact 24 PR, Good Side, the California Post Alliance, Confidential Creative, and People's TV for putting this panel together. But I'd also like to thank, of course, the panelists, Brian A. Cates, Brian Philip Davis. For some reason, Grant, Jamie, Jordan, and Nicholas only have first names on here, and you guys have last names, but you're equally as important. So thank you all for being on this panel, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.